Yeah. Subscribe to the channel. Jana forgave her dying husband and left the hospital. She tried not to show her fear to Dennis. She tried to cheer him up. You will be treated here, and everything will be fine. After the graduation, we will definitely celebrate it in the restaurant. Let's go to the party where we celebrated the wedding. I'll put on a red dress, the one you like so much. We will not invite guests. Only the two of us. You sleep for now. Have a rest. I'll be there tomorrow morning. Dennis listened to his wife's whispers and only smiled sadly. It was hard for him to speak. It was even hard for him to breathe. The man was lying on a special functional bed. Various drip tubes were pulled to his body, and devices that showed the patient's condition were packed from both sides. Yes, she was strong with Dennis, and when she left the hospital, she jumped on the bench near the porch and gave her will to her despair. Jana wept tears of her grief and did not see the way out. Why did this happen to them? After all, they got married just a few years ago. They dreamed of living a long and happy life together. After graduation from the institute, they created a small business together to make furniture for orders. At first, Dennis did everything by himself, and Jana was doing accounting and organizational questions. Over time, there were more and more customers. They hired employees, bought a big apartment, began to plan the birth of a child. And when Jana finally told her husband the happy news that they would soon become parents, an unexpected disaster came. Dennis' health began to deteriorate. He began to constantly feel tired, weak in the legs. Any physical load was hard, a breath appeared. The results of the medical examination sounded like a sentence. Heart failure. The young man began to go blind, and soon he had to be hospitalized. Jana moved to live with Dennis' parents. It was unbearable for her to be alone in an empty apartment. The common trouble united her with Nadezhda Alexeyevna and Nikolai Ivanovich. The parents of Jana lived far away, in another city, and Dennis's parents were now the closest people to her. Dennis was put in the best cardiology department in the city, which was headed by Professor Razumovsky. He explained to Jana, of course, this disease often occurs at an older age, but there are cases when heart failure occurs in young people, and even in children. Your husband's disease develops very quickly. Of course, we will do everything possible, but the predictions are very unsatisfactory. Please understand, my dear, we are not magicians. Doctor, but you can do something. Some kind of surgery, medicine, just tell me. The young woman repeatedly repeated in despair. In this situation, there is only hope for a heart transplant. I put your husband in line for the waiting of a suitable donor, but I don't want to reassure you too much. The waiting list is large. Besides, the heart should fit many parameters from size to blood group. We just have to wait and believe. And Jana hoped and believed in a miracle. She sat with her husband every day, who was losing more and more strength. She continued to support him morally, to build plans about how the baby will be born, how they will name him, how they will be brought up. And then she went out into the hospital yard and gave her will to her feelings. Once again, when she left the room of Dennis, she heard the doctor's back talk with the nurse and got pale. The victim has a rare healthy heart. It's amazing how he lives. There were already 2 clinical deaths, but they still started. But it's still useless. There, the head is completely shattered. You could try to do a test in conjunction with the recipient, but you need to get consent for a donor from relatives. And it seems to be difficult. Jana listened to this conversation without fully realizing all its meaning. She only understood the word heart, donor, and felt that it was about her, and it was something very important. Then the doctor noticed the woman and called her. Jana Ivanovna, how lucky that you are here. We need to talk urgently. And he said that they brought a young man who was injured in a fight. The damage to the brain is incompatible with life. Now the patient is being supported by artificial blood circulation. The lab assistant finishes the analysis. It seems that he is suitable for transplantation by all parameters. But to perform this operation, you need the consent of relatives. His wife and brother are in the hall, but the people are not quite adequate. The nurse is now trying to get their signature. Maybe you will be able to persuade them, advised by Dr. Janaya. In the hall, Jana immediately saw a woman of an uncertain age with dirty, curly hair and a man with a beaten eye. A young nurse was standing next to her. She was holding paper in her hands and trying to explain to them. He's already dead anyway, and you will help save the life of another person. But the couple clearly did not listen to the nurse. Loudly, with a large number of incensory words and interrupting each other, they try to find out who hit whom first. And what will happen to Volodya, who was taken by the police? Jana immediately realized that it makes no sense to talk about humanity and other high moral principles with people of this kind. You will probably have to spend a lot of money. I think it will help you. Just sign the documents. Seeing a rather decent amount, the woman immediately shut up and interest appeared in her eyes. She looked over to her relatives. It was clear that her money was very attractive. Then Jana took off her gold chain and earrings with diamonds, and the question was solved. The couple immediately signed all the necessary papers and quickly left the hospital building. Professor Razumovsky was called. The operational brigade began to prepare urgently. Jana realized that nothing would depend on her now. She can only wait for the transplant. She immediately called her parents and told them that the donor was found and that what they all expected with hope and fear would happen soon. Zinachka, my father and I are leaving. Wait for us in the hospital. Nadezhda Alexeyevna immediately replied. The woman went out into the yard. She was so nervous that she could not sit still. Jana walked and walked along the park paths. Contradictory thoughts were spinning in her head. Soon this nightmare will end, and they will live as before. According to statistics, percent of such surgeries end successfully. And what if her dentist gets into those very percent? How can she live without him? How to raise a child alone? Dennis promised that he would always be with her. He can't lie, so he will live. Of course, this is the best cardiology clinic in our region. But even the best doctors are not insured from mistakes. All these thoughts, one after another, were re-inherited in her head. Jana lost count of time. How many hours have passed? 2, 4, 10? The woman suddenly felt that her legs were weakening and darkening in her eyes. She barely managed to take a few steps and go down to the nearest bench. Jana woke up from a sharp and disgusting smell of air. She opened her eyes and looked around. She was lying on the hospital bed. She had a manjetto and a tonometer on her hand. Next to her were Nadezhda Alexeyevna and Nikolai Ivanovich. Zinachka, girl, how you scared us. Nadezhda Alexeyevna called out. When Jana came to her senses, Dennis' parents told them that they couldn't find her when they came to the hospital, and the phone didn't answer. Then it turned out that the phone was fully discharged. Told that they started to search for her everywhere and completely accidentally found her on a bench in the park. But most importantly, Jana with relief learned that the operation was successful. Dennis was still under observation in the emergency room, and the family went home to rest from the overexhausted excitement. Dennis recovered quite quickly after the operation, and a month later he was discharged from the hospital. He needed to periodically come for examinations, regularly take the drugs prescribed, and in general he returned to his former normal life. Before the birth of the child, there were 3 more months, and the spouses with the hobby took care of the repair and arrangement of the rooms intended for the baby. In the evenings, they liked to walk in the park, enjoying the good weather and society to each other. They tried to spend as much time together as possible, realizing that fate gave them a second chance, and you need to appreciate every minute. In one of the walks, Dennis said, I often think about the person whose heart gave me life. I would like to see his family. Jana did not like this idea at all. The relatives of the deceased looked like completely deserted people, like some homeless people. Maybe they don't have a home. But after a few days, Dennis again returned to this question. How he managed to get the donor registration address in the hospital, he did not tell his wife. Only the smart one smiled. Secret. But let's go anyway. The house at the specified address turned out to be a pitiful mess on the outskirts of the city. In the yard there were bottles and different garbage. Some windows were broken and clogged with some kind of rags. Everything was seen in ruins and deserts. It would be possible to think that no one lives in the house if. Jana and Dennis still went into the yard, and it turned out that they had come at the wrong time. The couple had to become the witnesses of a disgusting scene. The bodyguards and the police came together to make a court decision on the deprivation of parental rights. An elderly woman, probably from the bodyguard, held a dirty, thin baby in her hands at the age of 3. He did not cry, but looked at the screaming mom and trembled when she waved her hands. But the woman finally calmed down. The police left the court decision on the table and took the child to the orphanage. Dennis and Jana went home silently, shocked by what they saw. Only in the evening, after dinner, Dennis said, "I can't forget the eyes of this unfortunate child. Maybe it's because his father's heart is beating in me." Jana nodded. She thought the same thing. And the next morning, they made a decision. And their parents supported them in this. Nikolai Ivanovich was a famous and respected person in the city. He used all his connections to ensure that the adoption procedure went smoothly. And when Jana was discharged from the maternity home with a newborn baby, the girl already had an older brother. The dinner at the Astoria restaurant, as promised to Jana's husband in the hospital, still took place. The woman was in the very red dress, and they were only two, although not quite together. At home, with grandmother and grandfather, they were waiting for children, daughter and son. And there was a certainty that a long and happy life would come. And the son will grow in love and care. And he will definitely grow up to be a good, decent person.